Okay, hello and welcome to the second and final session of our 2020 Future of HVAC Summit, which I'm hoping is going to go on. I am H&V News Deputy Editor Neil Merrett, and I am going to be your host for the morning. So if I've just missed you at the cut-off there, welcome to today's 2020 Future of HVAC Summit, where we're going to be looking specifically at IAQ. Rest assured, we do have a broad range of experts that will join us throughout the morning to address the issue of IAQ, which has become a much greater priority over the last year for a range of reasons that you'll be aware of. For those of you with us at last year's summit, IAQ was seen as a painfully undervalued consideration when we're ensuring safe, sustainable and comfortable homes and buildings, particularly in the shadow of the Grenfell Tower fire. Our experts at the time said it was hard to stir wide-scale public debate and understanding of the importance of IAQ when we had the issue of fire protection still very much in the air. Obviously, there's been a few developments this year. They've changed the way the public considers what it is breathing, particularly in the buildings where we live and work, which for many of us, for the foreseeable future at least, are now one and the same. So it is timely to be looking at the issue. So before we start though, I'd just like to acknowledge our sponsors for their support for this year's event. So that's thank you to Residio, Cancer Contracting, Swagon and Mitsubishi for the support and being able to put on today's show. As with last week's session, for those of you with us, remain in the hands of the gods of Zoom and broadband. So although I am propped up against the router today, we ask you to bear with us if we do encounter any technical difficulties. Whether you're familiar with Zoom or not, you should see, hopefully on your screens, a Q&A button below. We do urge you to use this to submit questions for our experts throughout the day, which we definitely would like to hear from you on. But please, specifically the Q&A function there will be to put questions directly to us in the panel, and the chat function is more for technical issues if people are having troubles. Right, so we will endeavour to get through as many people and many questions as possible as we go along, but our advice remains to keep the questions short. And if you have to use several sentences, please don't press return until you're finished. So let's get started with the programme, and I will shut up anyway. So to kick off today, I'm pleased to say that we have Nathan Wood, Director of Farmwood M&E and Chairman of the BISA Wellbeing and Buildings Group, among his many roles. So Nathan, thanks for joining us, and it is over to you to get started.
Lovely, thank you, Neil. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the H&V Summit. My name's Nathan Wood, and as Neil's already said, I'm the Managing Director of Farmwood Limited, a ventilation company based in Kent, and one of my many roles is also the BISA Wellbeing in Buildings Chairman. So today I'm here to talk to you about how the HVAC industry has been affected by this awful pandemic, and what response they can have going forward in this new world. I just want to take you back to before COVID and the issues surrounding indoor air quality and the fight that we've been on for many, many years. So if you bear with, I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. And I'm just going to play you a short video. Air pollution is the biggest environmental threat to our health in the UK. Exposure to high levels of air pollution may increase our risk of contracting COVID-19. Our government has been taken to court multiple times over its air pollution plans and lost, where the judge ruled their plans as being unlawful. More recently, the Environment Bill failed to legally bind any commitments to the World Health Organization air pollution standards by 2030. With approximately 83% of UK reportable monitoring sites exceeding the UK air quality limits. These limits are at least 2 times higher than those set by the World Health Organization. But that's just outside air. What about the air inside our buildings? Buildings we consider to be our safe havens can often have pollution levels 5 to 8 times higher than those outside, and in some reported cases
This is a story about us, the indoor generation. A generation that spends 90% of its life indoors. It all started the day we left nature behind. We filled our homes with lovely things and all the stuff we wanted. Our homes became places you would never want to leave. Artificial light replaced daylight, and we built our houses so that nothing could escape. We cooked and showered, breathed and played, slept and sweated. But we had closed ourselves in to a point where nothing could get out. So when the air turned bad inside, we tried fixing it with chemicals. And we put in little artificial suns everywhere to make the darkness bearable. That's when things started to happen. Hard to notice in the beginning. Some needed help to sleep, to breathe, to not itch. Many of us even started to feel sad. So we turned on happy lamps to make the sadness go away. Then, scientists discovered that the air inside our homes is up to 5 times more polluted than the air outside. And that the lack of daylight can affect children's learning and increase blood pressure. It turns out that kids' rooms often have the highest concentration of toxicants in the house. In fact, millions of homes are unhealthy to live in. They discovered that living in damp and moldy homes increases the risk of asthma by 40%. And I learned that millions of people like me suffer from asthma and allergies caused by a bad indoor environment. And so, here we are. How the story ends is up to you, because it's not written yet. If you care about the indoor generation, do something. Begin to think and live differently. Even small changes can make a huge difference for coming generations. Learn how at theindoorgeneration.com.
Okay. Hopefully you're all back with me now. I wanted to just put that forward to show you that some people have already been living through a pandemic. They've already been dealing with health issues relating to poor air quality, be that outside or inside. Our attention more recently has been moved to indoor air quality surrounding the risk of contracting COVID. The difference being that we are the risk ourselves, and it's us that are needed to reactivate our buildings, get businesses working, get visitors back into museums, pubs, clubs, buildings. As the HVAC industry, we know what needs to be done in buildings. We know the rules and the regulations surrounding buildings. And as long as we tick some boxes on paper, these buildings should operate. They should operate to a specification on paper. How often, as a developer or an installer or a supplier, are you revisiting these buildings to ensure that they do actually meet the scope presented to you at the start? There's a huge problem with overheating in buildings. Buildings that meet excellent standards suffer with major problems once people move into them. So yes, there's some fantastic guidance coming forward from the HVAC industry, from BESA, from SIBSI, from REVA, which will give guidance. But without statutory regulations, the HVAC industry, the manufacturers, won't start to develop new technologies. They won't invest in R&D to push forward and scope out new systems. We said this last year at the BESA National Conference. Without regulation, manufacturers won't change. And certainly in the last 12 months, there's been some natural improvement in ventilation systems specifically that I've seen and come across. But the true innovation has come from the smaller startups, the innovators of the industry, that hopefully the bigger boys will start to support, hopefully not buy into the technology and shelve it to protect their own market stream. So whilst there's guidelines, there are rules, there are regulations, we need to adopt them, and we need to adopt them now in order to enable buildings to reactivate. So certainly, pollution dilution has been plugged for most buildings, especially schools that don't have any mechanical ventilation. They may not have any air conditioning. They may possibly have a recirculation fan. A lot of the schools that I've been visiting since COVID are looking at leaving their doors and windows open. The weather certainly is changing, and it's only going to get colder as we move forward into the winter months. That's not going to be an option. So whilst health needs to come before thermal comfort, there needs to be an understanding of what can be done in order to enable any building, not just your flagship high-end standard buildings in the major cities, but what can be done for the grassroots industry? What can be done for the schools and the colleges that don't have any budget for air? What can they do? What can they implement now that can safeguard them? So from modern academies down to your old sort of church-style sash window leaky building schools, they need the support from us, the HVAC industry, to develop new technologies that are affordable, easy to install, simple to maintain. There's no point having an array of fancy sensors and systems and smart technologies when all they need is to move air within their classrooms, within their buildings. Any buildings or companies that have become COVID secure, that may already have ventilation systems installed, by moving your desks around, fitting perspex screens, changing the layouts, have you also considered how that will affect the ventilation strategy within that building, within that room? You've changed the purpose of the layout of where people sit, how they move throughout the building. So you need to ensure that you've addressed the air quality as well and the air movement. So certainly ventilation
there's lots of guidance. You've got lots of talk about air conditioning, excuse me, and how there's lots of talk about the restaurant in China and how this this air conditioning recirculation system spread the virus. There was lots of other factors that come into play with that. The building was overcrowded. There was no natural ventilation, and any mechanical ventilation that was in that room wasn't working. But refer to the guidance. As I say, there's BISA guidance, SIBSI, REVA. There's lots from all around the world coming together. I think it's important as well that we recognise that different countries live differently and build differently to us as well. So, pre-COVID, there was a pandemic. It was poor indoor air quality and poor outdoor air quality. The government's been taken to court and lost. The Environment Bill doesn't enshrine indoor air quality within the limits. The working groups that myself and many other people within the HVAC industry are working with are pushing towards and part of all party parliamentary groups to make sure that this does become enshrined. But we need regulation. Manufacturers will not suddenly design new systems and bring forward new technological advances unless there's regulation. With the Hackett inquiry and all of the inquiry that's been developed and the information that's been pushed forward, the one thing that stands out is that we need to act now beyond compliance because it takes too long to bring it in. So it's down to us as an industry to push forward our ideas, to push forward investment, to make sure that the next pandemic that comes, the buildings are already secure. So we can look to the well-being standards, the reset standards. There's new ones that I'm reading about in terms of an immune building standard, a building's immunity to pandemics and viruses. That's the road that we need to be heading down. So what can the HVAC industry do? They can lead. It's time for us to take a lead and a leap of faith into our own technologies, our systems, look at the smaller startups, see what they're doing, implement smart technologies, affordable technologies, and then we might be heading in the right direction. A year ago, I said pretty much the same thing. And now we are here in the midst of a pandemic, a viral pandemic, and it's killing the economy. It's down to us to push forward and make change beyond compliance. And I think that's my time. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nathan. That's certainly a lot to get us starting on to begin with, which is going to be quite handy, really, as we move into what is going to be our first session for the day. So that, as we hope, does give us plenty to talk about, which we're going to look at how does the industry need to change, which is a somewhat broad question. I'd also like to thank Nathan, who's coming back with us for the panel. He's also going to be joined with us today by Claire Holman, who's the chair of the Institute of Air Quality Management, Lee Nurse, who's among his roles chair of BEMA's ventilation group as well. And we've also got Adam Taylor of Spire M&E. So thank you everyone for joining us today for the panel. And I guess I'm just going to look at the broad things to bring everyone in. I'm hoping we have everyone there at the moment to take in some questions. So if I could start, I guess, with Adam first. Can you hear me there? You bear with me. Hi there, Adam, you're right.
Hi there. Am I on?
You are, yes. Sorry, apologies for that one there. I was going to just start off, we've obviously just heard from Nathan there, but with yourselves as a starting point, where we are from how you see where industry is right now, What do we need to see change? We've obviously got the building regulations reforms coming up, but in that sense, where does the long-term ambition need to be for how we sort of manage and enforce the idea of and the quality of the air we're breathing in our workplaces and homes?
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge increase in interest in air quality. It's been my industry for a few years now. And for some strange reason, it's caught people's attention now. I think, yeah, policy change like Part F, big opportunity to focus on specific pollutants. A lot of our regulation is very oversimplistic in terms of just bringing a certain amount of supposedly fresh air into a building, but looking at specific pollutants in buildings and also getting people to think about whether bringing in outdoor air is actually going to improve the situation, because in a lot of locations at certain times of the day, bringing in a lot of outdoor air is not going to help the situation at all.
Brilliant. Yeah, I know because Nathan, if you're there as well, you've obviously been talking about that as well. This idea of fresh air in regulations, and as opposed to external air, which I guess ties into this idea of I guess there's a bit of changing public attitudes, perhaps more so than industry, in a sense of what we consider to open up windows to get fresh air in, but what actually is the challenge we've got on that one now. I think we've on technical challenges, we may have lost Nathan on that one. So if it's all right, I will move on to build on to the question you were talking about there, Adam, as well. He says, bear with me. So I guess from when you've talked about challenges there's a real sense of looking at how COVID has changed this. I guess bringing you both in at this point. I mean, is this the impetus now for change, or is COVID really just highlighting some of those more just the long-standing challenges that have always been there? Obviously, it just perhaps gives us a sense to be able to get the public brought in as well into the discussion somewhat more.
So yeah, I'll jump in there. I just dropped out there, so hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can. Yeah, no worries. Apologies for the technical.
Fresh air. Me and Adam have had a bit of humour on this one on social media and stuff about, and I will back him up. That outside air isn't always fresh, and I think that in terms of us as an industry, we need to back up what we talk about with the right terms. And certainly outdoor air isn't always fresh. As Adam said, certain times of the day, you won't want to open your windows depending on where you are in the world. You will need certain temperature differentials and atmospherics to allow air into your building. Just opening up a window on some days, if you do have nets or a curtain, they won't move. So just this assumption that if you're opening your windows or doors, that you are naturally going to dilute any pollution isn't always guaranteed.
And funny, thank you. We have now got the full panel there. Apologies, everyone, for a bit of the technical jiggery-pokery right there. So Linus and Klauman have both joined us as well. So to slightly bring back from what we've been talking about, I guess starting at that broad question that I put to Adam and Nathan as well. But I could start with you, Claire, and then Lee as well. From where the industry is, as we understand it right now, what would you welcome in terms of changes, perhaps with the building regulations, the ongoing sort of reforms we're seeing there as well?
Well, I would like to see actually a separate approved document on air quality. I think that at the moment it's in ventilation, Part F. I think it'd be really useful to have it completely separate, although obviously cross-referencing to the other relevant approved documents. And the reason for that is, I think indoor air quality, people just don't really know about it. I think by just having a separate document would actually raise its profile hugely with the building professions.
That's brilliant. And Lee, if so possible, as well, welcome to the panel. Could I put that question to yourself as well, in terms of where you perhaps want to see these reforms?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm representing BEMA today, a trade association, and in actual fact, from a regulatory point of view, the proposals for the changes from the Future Home Standard generally are a step in the right direction from the point of view of indoor air quality. We think indoor air quality. I would agree that we can't necessarily assume outdoor air quality is pure. By the way, I understand that argument is probably a separate one. What generally speaking, I think the interesting thing with the building regulations, of course, is that it influences new build, but it doesn't necessarily impact the 24 million homes that already exist. And about 75% of our buildings were built pre-1980 as well. So there's a considerable number of or considerable amount of the building stock out there that isn't really adequately provided for. We're pretty supportive of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Healthy Homes and their proposal for a Healthy Homes Bill. And we think that would go some way towards improving the air quality of more than just new builds. And I suppose our biggest issue there is regulations. And new build are one thing, but it's how you deal with the rest of the stock that's the other. And of course, the general principle is the more airtight and better insulated you make buildings, the greater the consideration needs to be about adequate ventilation for health. And not sure that's completely tied up, but things like the Green Homes grant that is being touted at the moment at least does allow the voucher to be used as part of the contribution from the point of view of providing adequate ventilation, which is good.
That's lovely. I mean, a step forward, and it's interesting talking about responsibility there. That was one of the questions I was hoping to ask you with, from again where we are right now and talking about that change, and as you were saying, having an actual air quality sort of factor in there, Claire, to look at and hold people to. Where does the responsibility lie for ensuring right now and defining sort of safe, clean air? I think defining is probably the important bit there. And is it really just putting too much responsibility on the HVAC sector itself? I know Nathan will have some views on this, but do we need to ensure a broader responsibility, obviously at policy level, and perhaps in the wider construction sector about understanding where these issues of good, safe, clean air are, particularly with, obviously we'll have the new building standards regulator coming into effect at some point. I guess, Nathan, if that's right, starting with you, I guess coming back into that idea of regulation there.
Yeah, so with domestic ventilation standards, and certainly from a BEMA point of view, it's vital that people take air quality and ventilation and ducted systems far more seriously. They're almost considered a second-hand trade. So it's almost as if the electrician's on a job and there's ventilation that needs to, and yeah, we can do it. So it was brought forward that people needed to be deemed competent, and there's the NIAQ ventilation competence and the BPEG ventilation competence. Competence that has a direct effect on our health and well-being 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, is taken over a 2-day course. I've done it, my team have done it, and it's okay. There's room for improvement, and certainly there has been improvements ongoing since the more recent release of the NIAQ training. However, it's not good enough. I will be brutally honest. The assessments that we have are poor, and although people worry about fire with electricity or electric shock, or plumbing with leaks, and there's lots of rules. Legionella rules. If our guys have an electrical inspection that comes in, they're sweating. They're reading up on the books the night before and they're going through it, and then they get tested and it's all pushed through. With ventilation, it's not taken seriously enough. It really isn't, and more needs to be done. The 2-day competency course is normally taken on by people whose bosses put them on the course because they have a desire to go after and tender for projects. So you'll have one person on the company that ticks the box that says that the company is competent. They can have all of the other members of their team installing the ductwork. As long as that competent person verifies it and signs it off, it's deemed okay.
Excellent. I mean, coming to, I guess, Adam, and we'll come around to the panel then, that idea of responsibility here. Is this an issue just of we need those regulatory standards, or is this again about sort of an understanding, perhaps even at an end user level, about the importance of this as an issue. But go to Adam with that as well there.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about, I think Nathan mentioned earlier, we do everything for compliance. So if people are looking, thinking about air quality because there's potentially someone in their company that has responsibility for well-being, you have to look at more forward-thinking standards, look like the WELL standard kicking off of that, or reset or air rated, and the guidance levels that are set for specific pollutants within that. That's at the moment people's go-to for getting advice on this. But adoption, I think adoption will now be faster for these types of standards. Previously, it's only been very high-end buildings that that's been achievable for, to doing something beyond compliance. And a lot of that is because of the way we build. Things go D&B and it's all done down to the smallest cost. And historically, clean air was a luxury rather than a right. So we definitely need to move beyond that. How that will be put into legislation, I think we need to start with the industry, because the government probably still won't prioritise it. I think it needs to come from within the industry.
And if I can go to Claire, is that something that you'd see in terms of this issue of responsibility?
Well, I think ultimately it should be the government's responsibility, but I think I agree, because the government will take some time to actually do anything about it. But I think we've seen progress with having the VOC guidelines from Public Health England. I mean, obviously, Public Health England is the body who's responsible for, as the name, public health. I think we can have standards for new build and major renovations. I'm not sure whether we can have legally binding standards for existing, particularly in the home market, the domestic market, because, for example, people want to smoke in their home, they're going to smoke in their home. And I think, as a country, we're not very receptive to having interference with how we live our lives. So I think it's really appropriate to have mandatory standards ultimately for new build, but for existing homes it's much more difficult. That's not to say that we shouldn't be looking at other workplaces, and the trouble is we've got the workers' exposure limits, but they are so lax compared to those standards we have for outdoor air. That actually they're widely achieved, and yet they probably are having health effects in the sort of concentrations that some workplaces are being exposed to. So I think it's a very big issue. I think we're just at the beginning stages. I'm really pleased Public Health England is taking an interest in it. And I certainly know that government is, in terms of its research budgets, are now putting a lot more money into indoor air quality, because actually we don't know that much about it. We don't know what people have been exposed to, and we don't know what the health effects of that exposure is. And we have a lot of people selling these air purifiers. We know that some of those air purifiers are actually causing all sorts of chemistry to go on inside buildings that are creating other known toxics. So we're still at the beginning of all this, is I think what I'm saying.
That's an interesting perspective. I mean, certainly we've been talking about priorities as well, and perhaps that is part of changing that and raising a priority at a public health level, certainly. Lee, if I can just finish off with that's your responsibility review there as well.
Yeah, I think it's a complex argument, as I think we've just discussed there, really. From the point of view of how building regulations are applied, it's an interesting one. Air quality in building regulations is really assumed based on an airflow rate. When you meet compliance to these building regulations, it's about establishing the appropriate ventilation rate. That the building regulations themselves, Part F, makes an assumption about that outdoor air quality, if you like. There's an assumption that the air quality is okay if you provide the ventilation rates. I'm not sure that is actually the case. They're not necessarily linked, as we've discussed, I think. But generally speaking, as a principle, I think BEMA have been very vocal in the past about ventilation and making it a controlled surface, going back to Nathan Wood's point there in relation to the control we should have for our air. We've been very vocal about that, and I think there's been steps in the right direction in recent years, but I'm sure there's more to go. And then in the future, I think it will be important to establish air quality levels, let's say, rather than just ventilation rates. there needs to be much more focus around the linking of those two issues rather than just one, which is how much air am I bringing into this room? Is there an opportunity to treat that air in another way, or do something to purify or make it a healthier environment than simply dragging air in from outside, which we may not have control of from the point of view of the air quality?
I mean, I suppose that brings us to that issue of standards and where we apply them from the perspective of sort of air quality and building regulations. I was going to ask, I mean, with obviously the reforms we've got going on, I wanted to see if there was sort of sufficient scope we felt at the moment to be able to begin to address this, whether, as you said, Public Health England are taking a notice, but is there enough there at the moment, consultation-wise or focus-wise, to be able to actually start to put in some of these steps, these actual levels that people can perhaps begin to work to, can begin to design technology to? If I go to Nathan next, I know you were talking about that technology side of it.
Yeah, there's lots of investment already been put forward and spent. Certainly Sadiq Khan in London, Clean Air for Schools, has spent a hell of a lot of time and resource with high-end consultants putting together reports looking at different technologies. I'm being really negative today, sorry, but I just feel that the money could be better spent by actually addressing some schools, and actually, rather than spending hundreds of thousands of pounds looking at different technologies, actually spend the money better by addressing problem schools. He's got a list of them. He could work through them. You know, there's lots and lots of information out there. I do agree with Claire that there's not a great deal known specifically on indoor air quality and how that can be brought together from different standards. And globally, there's lots of talk from relative humidity that we should be looking at ultrafine particles. It's being able to give, in my head, certainly the works that we come across, is a basic fundamental understanding that needs to be, and I do agree again, Claire, in a separate document other than just Part F and referring between the two, because we can have rules and regulations, but it needs to be mainstream. You know, not everybody will jump on their phone, oh, let's look at the HSE guidance, what's that? And things get engineered out, you know, design and build, but yes, there's certainly needs to be a basic fundamental bar set for clean air in any building.
And actually, I'll go to Claire on that one as well, because as you were mentioning about legislation from that side, but about this idea then of the sufficient scope right now to where do we begin to sort of address this idea of the standards we need being in place wherever we sort of apply them.
Well, it is a difficult one because we don't have the degree of knowledge that we have about outdoor air quality. So I think, you know, that's on the table. We're still are at the learning stage. But when you look at the standards that are in and the information that's in the draft Part F, you find that it's so out of date. It was written originally in 2010, and things have moved on since 2010, particularly about outdoor air quality and its ingress into buildings. So that's one problem that I have with the draft Part F. In terms of the future, I think if we actually start working now towards having a part, I think it would have to be Part S. I think that's how far down the approved documents we have. I think if people were starting to work on it now, you know, these documents take a long time to produce. I think we could be moving in the right direction. As I said, Public Health England has got the VOC guidelines that they published last year. We know quite a bit about the sort of the problems with particles within buildings. We know about the problems of them, you know, cooking and the high levels of particle emissions that come out of cooking and people not using their extractor fans. So I think we have enough knowledge to start, bearing in mind, of course, that the approved documents don't take a long time to be revised. So, you know, we had the 2010 of Part F, and then it was revised in 2013. Well, we're now in 2020. But I think we should be working in that direction now. I mean, as an industry, we should be doing it in consultation with government. But I think government they are interested in the subject. And that's the first step in the right direction. So I am hopeful that they will start taking it seriously, but I am a little bit concerned about how we can have a standard for existing homes, because as I said before, it's very difficult about interfering with people's lives. And I think that might be quite difficult, unless those standards were set at such high levels that the vast majority would meet them anyway. But, you know, if you've got a smoker in the household, it all goes out the window.
I suppose that comes back to, as we're seeing in heating and all sides, the variety of the existing housing stock anyway adds to where you begin to look like that. If I can go to Lee, still on that issue of scope to address standards and the standards we have where they might need to change. I'm trying to get a view of how you see that at the moment, of where there may be issues to change that or scope to.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've discussed that in a reasonable amount of detail already. The linking air quality rather than just ventilation rates into the standards from a regulatory point of view, I think would be materially different from where we are now. And having a unified vision of what that is explicitly and how it's measured and how we can go about delivering that would be important in the future. And I'm quite confident that we will need to deal with that at some point. If the regulations provided a route to delivering that, even if it was relatively prescriptive from the point of view of air treatment, let's say, rather than measurement, which of course is very difficult, you'd go some way to reducing the risk that the ventilation rates that you put in are actually providing adequate air quality. So from an industry's perspective, I think that the industry would do everything it could to support proposed changes like that. We'd be very supportive of it. And as I mentioned earlier, we're not shy from the point of view of addressing the importance of the technology that we sell and its application into buildings and how that can be evolved and developed over time. We're a relatively proactive industry from that point of view. We want to address any new thinking. And we'd certainly like to bring products and solutions to market as a group of manufacturers and suppliers in the UK, I'm sure of it, that would do everything they could do to provide better health for occupants. I get the point that you can't regulate for an existing building if somebody's smoking in it, but at the same time you can't regulate for that in a new build when you sell it to someone who might smoke, but we still regulate the level of quality that's deliverable within that from the point of view of ventilation rates. So I think we should certainly have a more proactive approach to providing adequate ventilation rates for health, even if they don't necessarily deal with individual lifestyle choices, which of course we can't regulate.
No, certainly, I know at the minute that probably government will be keen to keep away too much from that. But Adam, to come to that point to yourself as well, there, just about this idea of scope and where things can be changed. From your discussions, your understanding of things, where do you see that possibly going?
Well, you can see an evolution in the healthy building standards. It's gone from being prescriptive to performance-based outcomes. So actually measuring what you're delivering in the building rather than just going through and saying, right, we're going to have X ventilation rate, this filtration. And I think that's ideal if the cost for measuring the outcomes was good, was at something that a price point that was affordable. Temperature and humidity sensors, relatively cheap. If we keep going down this avenue, will we get to a point where we can even measure particles cheaply? At the moment, particle sensors are extremely expensive, but particles are really harmful. So whether there can be more investment in that, but the market will drive the prices of these things. We're going to be having air quality sensors in our phones soon. So the prices for certain types of air quality sensing are really coming down now. And whether it's going to be cheap enough at this point to drive performance-based outcomes, I don't think so. I think we maybe need to go back and measure and publicly share the information on how bad air quality is within buildings, because it's changing all the time. As buildings become more airtight, when we set ventilation rates a decade later, the building standards are much tighter, and therefore the air quality is potentially completely different. So I think we need to go and have a look at how bad air quality is inside buildings, and then maybe set prescriptive numbers for now until sensor technology catches up in terms of price.
And it's interesting. I was going to Oh, sorry.
Let's jump on that. Maybe you can advise on this as well, Lee. In terms of the Green Deal vouchers that were put forward, initially the government only proposed them to be for double glazing and insulation to seal up our buildings. And it was the industry that fought back to say, hang on a minute, by doing this, you're going to create so many more problems. Lee, is that right, that you guys were quite vocal in
well, we certainly would have been defending our position within that process, because of course a lot of the work that's been done on past 2030 and 2035 over recent years that came out of Every Home Matters and the Bonfield review at the time helps establish far better guidance for the application of ventilation solutions when you improve air tightness or insulation levels of buildings. So for us to have a scheme like the Green Homes Grant that didn't follow what has become, I think, common knowledge as the latest position on that, let's say, or the latest guidance, and a lot of work was done around it, just seems slightly odd to us, and we were glad to see that there was inclusion that if you're making your building more airtight and insulating, and you have to improve your ventilation rate, which you might well do, particularly if you're making natural ventilation in your building lower through the changes. It's good to see it in there, but of course we did certainly vocalise our concerns that if it wasn't included, there was a risk that the Green Homes Grant could lead to more insulated, more airtight buildings with less air to breathe and to keep people healthy. So we certainly had a position on that for sure.
I mean, it's interesting. I know we've recently looked at, and even the government's own studying of this is the health links at the moment are the actual research specifically at this between ventilation, air quality. It's widely understood, but there isn't the research and the actual level of understanding there yet to be able to make sort of clear statements and clear policy on that. I mean, I guess it comes into this idea of I guess there's not a singular means of measuring and quantifying per se at the minute that we have to go and say a building's unhealthy or right there. I mean, I guess, Nathan, if I can start with you on this one about where would we begin to look at measuring and deterring sort of air quality, if not already in buildings, to say that's healthy, that's working, something needs to be looked at. Obviously I get it's a bit more complicated than having right or wrong, good or bad in a building, but yeah. Where do we start with that? And obviously I'm sure industry already has some aims on that.
So I think if we looked at BD 101, the regulations for schools, again, as Claire mentioned, an outdated document by the time it was published, and certainly people that were directly involved in it were embarrassed to talk to me about it at one of the conferences. I shall not name names. They focused on hybrid technologies and monitoring of CO2. Suddenly manufacturers left, right and centre overnight developed a hybrid system, and they were able to address because there was a specification to meet. When we're looking at dealing with different pollutants, there's a lot of work that's going in and around air quality management areas. So where a development is proposed, especially schools, they are looking at whether or not it's in a polluted area and whether or not it should be relocated or not allowed to go forward. But for existing schools that may be in a polluted area, or that there's additional infrastructure that's being built, certainly building sites in and around places can cause all sorts of problems for indoor air quality for existing buildings. But being able to accurately monitor, there's lots of talk about the fact that poor air quality monitoring is probably worse than not monitoring at all. Some sensors and the difference of how they work, they might just have an algorithm, so it hasn't actually got a specific sensor within the box. It uses a different sensor to use an algorithm to give a result for something else. It's wildly under-regulated. We use different types of sensors. We've got high-end sensors, really expensive ones, down to your cheaper versions. But it's all about, for me, how we use them, how we use that data and not manipulate the data. And it is far, far too easy for companies to manipulate data. How it's represented. I mean, there's lots of guidance on how you should use these monitoring levels as well, whether or not it's a timed average, whether you're taking a background ventilation rate, are you taking it an outside pollution level at the same time as an internal. But I don't know about you guys, I don't breathe at an average rate, I just breathe. So in terms of an instantaneous measurement, if you're standing on the road and you get an instantaneous measurement of NO2, that's what's going into your lungs at that moment in time. So there needs to be tightening up on it. Certainly from what we know outside, needs to change to how we monitor it inside. But as well, it's like air purifiers or ventilation systems. You need to actually get the air through and past that sensor in order to see what's going on. So it's not an exact science.
I'll just jump in there. I think 2020 was supposed to be the year when we got a bit of guidance on air quality sensors. China, America, and Europe were all working on standards. And when we get to that point when there is standards for indoor air quality monitoring, then I think the market will know what to do. This year, a lot of sensor manufacturers have really struggled, and a few of them have gone under. And it's a very difficult market because you can develop a product. It might be the top of the market for 6 months, and someone brings something else out. You don't sell it, you don't recoup your investment, and you go bust. So once we get some guidance, I think on what is a good air quality sensor and where we need to be with the quality, then I think the industry will take a leap forward.
Claire, if I can come to yourself on that with how we should begin to be looking at measuring or the factors we need to be looking at there. Is that something broadly from your perspective that you've seen, or?
Well, I mean, in terms of outdoor air quality, we've been monitoring outdoor air quality for many, many years. And we have a pretty good idea about the uncertainties of different types of equipment. You know, we have the high-end ones, which are, you know, EU reference methods. And then we have, you know, we use things called diffusion tubes, which time average over 4 weeks concentrations of nitrogen dioxide. But we've characterized pretty well how they perform. But really supporting what Adam's saying, in terms of indoor, we haven't really done those studies. We don't really know. And I think the way we monitor indoors is going to be very different to the way we monitor outdoors. I think that we need to make use of the emerging technology. The sensors will be the way forward because they're cheap. I mean, we're not going to spend, I don't know how much, £10,000 on buying a chemiluminescence NOx analyzer, which we use outdoors, because we need something that's very portable, that's cheap, and can be used in lots of different environments. But I feel that there's still a lot of work to be done about how often do we measure to characterize a building. Where in that building do we measure? Do we measure pre, post occupancy? Probably need to do both. But there's a whole lot of stuff about monitoring protocols that I think we need to be establishing some guidance and get industry to accept widely how we go about doing it. It's going to change over the years because as the technology changes, we need to be flexible. But I think we're sort of not quite there yet about, as you said, who was it? It was Nathan was saying, well, you know, you might be walking along a road and be exposed to a high level of nitrogen dioxide. But, you know, the level of exposure and the type of exposure and the variations are very different indoors. And that's why we need more knowledge to be able to actually come up with some really good monitoring protocols. But I do think sensors will be the way forward. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But we're not there yet with them. There's still a lot of problems with them about how accurate they are and what they are actually measuring. Because I do believe we should be measuring what we are wanting to measure, the actual pollutants. So, you know, a Part F has total VOCs in it. I think that is ridiculous because those VOCs could be any VOCs and there's no relationship with the health impacts. And we actually need to be driven by what the end point is. The end point is to improve human health.
There's a lot we don't know still in terms of how that all pulls together, I guess. I was going to actually, we've got a few questions in actually from the audience, which do seem broadly on an interesting theme here about user demand and a bit of educating the end user, but this needs to perhaps be driven, as you were saying, about these different technologies, but actually, where is the motivation going to come for industry to start putting them in and understanding? So I guess coming to the panel there, that idea of the user, is that the right way, or is that even a possible way of trying to get a sort of public education in the sense to start driving this in so that specialists are broadly being asked to fit sort of solutions that can help, even if it be sensors there? And I guess Nathan, what would you view on that in terms of the role the public here? Is that the wrong way around to start saying, well, we need to educate the public and they can drive this demand for
I think the public do need to be made aware, because as an industry, we're very good at talking to each other like we are today. And I've been sharing this with friends, family that think I'm the clean air geek, and that you know, I'm off my rocker because we live in Kent and the air quality is lovely. I put a post up recently on our social media on LinkedIn and just showed the filter quality of our MVHR in our own office. Within 3 months, it was completely caked. We've basically quite large debris and everything else, but we consider it to come from a clean area, and we've completed lots of works there. But I think lots of people are now more aware of air quality, and especially around COVID, they're looking into things a bit more carefully. And on the domestic market, I am seeing lots of people ask us about these inline filters as additional bolt-on systems that can be put in line. So for argument's sake, carbon filtration, manufacturers are producing lots of these nice inline boxes, but they're giving it like many years life expectancy, but yet there's no guidance for the industry to be able to test it with air quality monitors. So it's not like we've got a spray can of NO2 that we can put outside the filter and then put an NO2 monitor the other side of it and gauge what's coming across it to work out whether or not it's completely fully absorbed. So yes, the public do need to be made more aware, and I think as an industry we should be screaming and shouting at the public, because I think if the public knew more about this, there would be more of an outcry, and then you get more of a response coming back. But certainly, yes, I have seen an increase in inquiries coming through for people asking about not just new technologies but sensors. What's the air quality like in our area? I mean, just down the road from our office, there's an air quality management area with a DEFRA approved air quality station that I'm in conversation with the council about co-locating some cheaper sensors and doing some works there. There's daily occurrences of exceeding levels of air pollution, but all they do is monitor it and put it on a website. So there's an old people's home, there's a nursing home, a nursery. Nobody knows about it. There's this funny little station there with dilution tubes and everything else. Everybody just goes about their daily activities. So we're looking at now putting up a traffic light system quite close to it with a business that we know, using their data but actually forecasting it for them to cause a bit of a ruckus. Because I think that's what's needed. You know, if you start to put your neck on the line and be prepared to say what's right and what's wrong, then people will generally start to listen and cause problems.
To second that, I think you're absolutely right. There is definitely a role in monitoring and measuring air quality and presenting it, just like the smart meter rollout. If people became more conscious of their energy use, they become more connected to what they're doing and make better decisions. There's a fair amount of evidence, I think, in other industries where monitoring and measurement of things helps behaviour over time. The issue that we do have is I think there does have to be some work on standardisation internationally in relation to what that traffic light system would look like. At the moment, there's lots of systems you can buy that have traffic light systems, from air quality devices to measuring devices, but there isn't really an international standard around what's being represented in those. And actually, two different devices can give very different feedback and present different information, but still be considered the same from the point of view of the consumer, and they're perhaps not. So I think we have to make sure that as an industry that we've got our ducks in a row, so to speak, in relation to what that actually is and what it looks like. But absolutely, over time, anything that we can do to make people more conscious of the air that they're breathing will be a good thing.
And Claire, if I could just come, we're finishing up the panel, but just as a finishing point about users there. I mean, how from your work and research, how has that been factored in, I guess, to understanding where we begin to get perhaps public involved in discussion much more about what they're breathing there?
I mean, I believe public awareness is vital, because public awareness drives policy change, and we need at the highest level policy change on this issue. So public awareness is very important. I would say that a lot of people, not a lot, some people are buying sensors to measure air quality within their own homes. And I think, I mean, as Lee just said, that I think people don't really understand the data that they've got, and that can be a problem. I know this is about a ventilation conference, but I would also say that it's not just about ingress of poor air quality from outside. I mean, the other issue, of course, is the sources of air pollution within buildings. So, for example, I mentioned earlier about cooking. That's one source, but also the building materials that are used, even the toiletries and the cleaning materials that we use are all indoor air pollutants. So there are so many different sources, and I just think we just need to make sure that they are all considered. Of course, ventilation is important, because if you've got an indoor source, you want to remove it from the building, but they're not necessarily coming in from outside.
Well, wrangling all that together just about, and there's a few more questions, as this always happens, that comes up, but we have actually got to, annoyingly, the end of the session there. So after the initial technical troubles, I just want to thank the panel there for taking part and for giving us something to certainly get started on the rest of the day. So thank you all for your time now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're then moving on then to our next session, where we're actually going to be today now looking at the issue of innovation in IAQ. So to start off, I'll be handing over to Peter Diamond of Camphil to give us a little insight from an industry specialist and how they're pushing ahead with solutions to tackle some of the challenges we've just raised facing our buildings. So Peter, I look forward to speaking to you afterwards, but over to you.
Thanks very much, Neil. I hope you can all hear me and see me. I've got today a short presentation which I'll be very happy to share with you and talk about the issues of concern in indoor air quality in buildings. So I'll just see if I can get my presentation up now, and hopefully you can confirm that you will be able to see it. Let's just see if I can get the first right. How does that look? Is that all good, Neil? I'm assuming you can hear me. So I will.
Yes, I can, Peter. We can see it fine on that one.
Brilliant. Okay, so I've got a number of areas of concern to go through today, and certainly, as far as I'm concerned, I have had many years' experience in air filtration, about 25, and then about another 10, 15 years before that in air moving and the fan industry. And the issues concerning public these days, I tend to find, are based on air pollution, as I heard you mention just now, and obviously how the risk of infection might be increased by inhaling indoor air, and in particular the droplet aerosols that are produced and come out of people who are infected. And this is where air filtration can play an additional role. Obviously, I'm not saying it can compensate for things like social spacing, cleaning hands, and wearing of face masks, of course. Those are all current requests and requirements for people to reduce risk. But if you can reduce the background levels of droplet aerosols that are put into the airspace by an infected person, then you will correspondingly reduce the chance of picking up and inhaling those aerosols and droplets. And of course, in sufficient level, they can cause infection. So just to sort of home in on this, there is a lot of talk about from a lot of people about the issues concerned, but as an air filtration engineer, I'm really interested in removing particles from the air. That's what I'm all about. That's my area of expertise, if you like. I've done many years work in BSI, CEN and ISO to develop filter test standards to do exactly that, for reliable performance that can be demonstrated and is repeatable, and we can stand by that, and I'll go into that in a little more detail. Some very eminent people, Lydia Morawska, who's heading up the World Health Organization side of things on the COVID threat, has said there's absolutely no doubt that the virus is spread through the air, and of course along with that goes the risk of infection. So this just gives you a sort of characterization of the size and the possible projection of the aerosols. They can go up to 6 meters from a cough a sneeze, and anything that is involved with shouting or talking loudly. Singing was another activity that was recently causing concern and still is. And large droplet aerosols are drawn to the earth and surfaces quite quickly within a short distance. And because of their higher volume, they tend to carry, or they have the potential to carry more virus particles, if you like, within them. But the smaller particles, of course, remain airborne for much longer times. And when you get down to the smaller particle size that is typically that of a virus, which is around about an average estimate about 0.12 micron, then these sorts of particles and sizes can stay in the air virtually indefinitely. So they become a cause of concern if there's inadequate ventilation in the airspace in the rooms of concern, where there may be infected people. Obviously hospitals spring to mind immediately, but also working areas where offices might have high densities of people and low levels of ventilation. So in that sort of situation, the recommendations from a lot of associations are to use increased rates of ventilation, air changes, which of course, providing you're not bringing outdoor air that is polluted into the building, it will be clean and fit to inhale without undue risk, and it will displace a lot of the droplet clouds, aerosols that will be produced as a result of infected people. And of course, this infection comes within people. Once they're carriers, once they're hosts to the virus, they are literally projecting this virus cloud wherever they go and whatever they do. Just to get a feel for the droplets, the size range which is important is really the ones up to 10 microns, or certainly the ones above that will drop to earth fairly quickly. And of course, if they drop on a surface, that will enhance the contact route of infection. So that's another reason why people insist on cleaning hands if you're brushing against these sorts of surfaces that have had large droplets depositing at quite a high level. That's what would happen there. But in the air, then smaller particles down to about 0.5 micron are likely to carry these infective virus. And as you can see there, there's a four possibility of diameter within a 0.5 micron if you're talking about 0.12 micron. But the chances of the density of that virus are quite low. Similar types of coronavirus, for example, swine flu, have shown 30 parts per million in some of the samples taken there. So chances of small particles having virus are reduced obviously with size, but in large numbers, of course, it will still be very significant. And you're talking about literally millions of possible particle carriers floating around within very close proximity to a person who's infected. The 10 microns, you could literally fit, as you see there, 80 of these viruses across the diameter, which would mean the volumetric would be around about 500,000 if it was 100% virus. But again, 30 parts per million reduces that very considerably. So we're talking about a numbers game here, and it basically boils down to the fact that more of these particles that you can remove out of the air, the lower the risk of infection. And of course, that is a very simple concept, and that's where use of air filters comes into its own. Of course, this is where we would advise the use of high efficiency filters to do the job. So let's have a look. I've mentioned previously about the various occupations people indulge in, or involuntary sneezing and coughing, for example, talking. You can show that the more active and dynamic the activity, the respiratory activity, the greater the level of concentration. This is a fairly old study, but it just gives a feel for the variance depending on what's going on. And if you're talking about sneezing, you can talk also about shouting and singing. They would come sort of probably fairly close to the coughing range of particle projection here across the size range. You can see there's a peaking value here around about 10 microns, and that falls below, of course, these long suspended particle times below the 10 micron. You can see there 8.2 minutes, 1.5 hours, 12 hours, 41 hours from studies that have studied particle abilities to be suspended in air before gravity draws them to a surface. And that would be from a 5 foot, or the area of a typical person, sorry, the height of a typical person standing and doing the coughing. So, how can we mitigate the risk? Well, there has been a lot of talk about HEPA filtration. They need to be fitted in all ventilation systems. HEPA filters are quite pricey compared to general HVAC filters. They are extremely effective. They're used in, for example, Porton Down and places where they do research into viral diseases. And I think I would suggest that if Porton Down is quite happy with the performance, then so should the rest of the country be in terms of mitigation of risk of infection. Indeed, the new standards that cover testing of HEPA filters, which is EN 1822, always insist on that as a test requirement. That will give you minimum efficiency for a particle which is known as the most penetrating particle size, which coincidentally is almost exactly the size of the SARS viral particle estimate. So around about 0.12 to 0.14 is the most penetrating particle size for a HEPA filter, typical HEPA filter. And you can see there on the bottom left the classification for the various types of HEPA filter in terms of efficiency. As I mentioned before, H14 by EN 1822 for 2019 is 99.995% efficient removal of particles at about 0.12 to 0.14, which is of course the typical viral particle size. So you've got a huge efficiency level there, and that will give an extremely high level of protection and reduce any concentrations should you use it for that purpose. And there are a lot of high-end air purifiers. Dare I mention it, we manufacture this type of air purifier that will have H13, H14 filters fitted and be more than capable of removing any viral carrying particle or even viral particle themselves. So there is a lot of misinformation flying around at the moment, coming mainly from the US, where they do testing of HEPA filters down to 0.3 microns, which is obviously above the size of the COVID virus. And so people are getting worried that, oh, it's only 0.12 microns, it must be passing through the HEPA filter. This isn't the case, because certainly, as you can see, the test methodology in EN 1822 gives you the least efficient case, which is the most penetrating particle size case. And that will show an extremely high level of efficiency. And either side of that worst possible case for penetration of the particle, you will see an increase in efficiency. So EN 1822 is actually sitting alongside the ISO 29463 standard now, which was derived methodology-wise from EN 1822, which is the new world standard. That's 2017, and that is in force around the world as a global standard. And as soon as the US adopt that, then they will get their enlightenment and realize that 0.3 microns is really not an adequate test. You want to use most penetrating particle size methodology. So that covers HEPA filters very briefly. So let's move on to the other test standards. You've got 167983, which covers the categorization of air. So you've got outdoor air, ODA3, ODA2 most commonly, or ODA1, and you've got indoor air, which is SUP, supply air 1 to 5 through air handling units, which gives you ID levels when mixed with indoor air. So it's all been categorized properly now, so you can do indoor-outdoor ratios and indeed indoor air ratios to calculate performance for air purifiers and air cleaners of all types. I won't spend long on this because we've only got a few minutes left, but it is there as a reference for those who would like to study the categorization of air. And for HVAC filters, the removal of PM1, which contains the most penetrating particle size range, which is a concern, covering viruses, covering air pollution, fine combustion particulates from air pollution. You need an 80 to 90% filter to meet the SUP2, SUP1 requirements for this standard. And indeed, if you do selections for these, even a basic, what would have been F7 to a good standard would be more than adequate in the 5 micron and up range of particle sizes here. I've taken this data directly out the test report for ISO 16890. So you can see at 0.5 micron, which is pretty close to the viral size, you'll get 63% for EPM1, 60% classified filters. And EPM1, 85% there, you get 86% removal and a very high removal in the upper 90s. So that tells you straight away that most good quality HVAC filters are more than capable of dealing with aerosols that are likely to be emanated from infected people. So these filters work, they're properly tested. And I think there's been a lot of scaremongering around, and current advice advises that in recirculation systems, as winter's coming on, people won't want to open windows if it's minus temperatures. If they upgrade their recirculation filters to these sorts of level, they will have a good level of protection. If they are in building places where there's low levels of ventilation or no ducted mechanical ventilation, they can use standalone air purifiers and air cleaners. There is actually an air purifier controller and sensor unit called an air image, which can be used to not just monitor the air, but control recirculation, air purifiers. And indeed, some of these air purifiers can directly draw supply air from outside as well. So they are extremely effective devices. And you can get your data to a good level of detail here. You can get daily monitoring, weekly monitoring, monthly monitoring, indeed hourly and minute monitoring or annual monitoring to get a full profile of the challenge of PM 2.5, which contains the PM1 level of concern. So effectively, if you're reducing PM 2.5 to a very low level, well below the PM10 World Health Organization recommended maximum, i.e. say 2.5 micrograms per meter cube, something like that, you will be providing a good level of protection to people in offices. You can see here, this is a characterization curve from Aston University, which not only tells you you can get good reductions within the World Health Organization levels from outside, but it actually shows very close correlation between nitrogen dioxide and fine particulates, which means that you can actually have very much confidence that if you use the correct air purifiers, it will reduce NO2 as well as fine combustion particulates. Here, this one shows a test that's been done to reduce PM 2.5. In actual fact, this is a particle count, so the 0.3 to 0.5 micron range here. This is using a particle counter, shows a 98% reduction in a room, around about 50 cubic meters over a 25-minute period, from about 30 million particles in the case of 0.3 to 0.5 down to a couple of 100,000, which represents a 97–98% reduction, which shows a very high level of protection. If you've got that sort of low concentration, that's can be really directly correlated to risk. So why wouldn't you want to do it? It can be monitored. So you've got a complete air purification monitoring solution here, which can be dashboarded on any computer, mobile phone or tablet. So this is really a development that is now available, fully tested. The filters are fully tested to the latest standards, and they will provide a demonstrable solution to a problem of great concern at the moment, namely COVID-19 and also ingress of air pollution, fine combustion particulates and NO2 into buildings. Energy efficiency is obviously a concern with HVAC filters. So make sure you're using low energy air filters as part of the solution. The data is available on the Eurovent website for all major manufacturers, so you can test the performances for that. And so what I would say to you is we need to place air quality at the top of the agenda in the coming period. It's no good just sort of looking the other way or pretending there's no problem. This is a problem in city locations where most of us are living and working, and we need to better understand the effect of particulate matter on our health. The smaller the particles, the greater the level of penetration into the human body and the more damage they can do, especially if they're toxic. And of course, if they're infective like the COVID-19 virus, then this is where we need to get a good reduction on PM2.5 and PM1. So clean hands, social spacing, face masks, and quite frankly, I would add clean air to that as well as a recommended strategy that's highly desirable for people inside buildings. Thank you very much. I hope that's of interest to you, and obviously prepared to answer any questions as a result. So back to Neil. Here's the little box I'm talking about, by the way. Very easy to use, very portable.
Hi, Peter.
Hi.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I know we're going to did have a question or two of you actually, but I know we're going to move into the panel. So what I'll do, if that's all right, for our next panel, so conveniently you're a part of that, is I'll put that over in the wider discussion we're going to have now. So delighted to say Peter will be joining us once again for the next panel, which is a more holistic approach to ventilation. So what we've got here, along with Peter, we have, once again, I'm hoping I've got this right this time, is so we've got Adam Taylor, once again, Managing Director for Spire Building Services, Dean Kent, the Business Director for Swagon, and Claire Curran, the Managing Director of Lineker, and BSA Vice President as well. So there should be plenty to get us on and talking with that. So welcome to all of you on the panel, and thank you again for joining. The first question, I suppose, with holistic ventilation is what we're going to be looking at. So I wanted to really just put you to start broadly and ask a layman's question. What does sort of a holistic ventilation system, holistic air quality look like in terms of a system, in terms of our present understanding? And to that end, what have been the main factors so far in stopping us from having more holistic, these holistic systems in ventilation being a reality? And if I may, I will start with Adam on the right and come round to the panel as well there.
Thanks, Neil. Despite working in ventilation for a long time, I did actually look up what ventilation was actually about, just to see if I had the right idea about it. And allegedly it's diluting contaminants and also temperature control. So yeah, if what we're trying to do is dilute contaminants, you can kind of say that is, let's reduce the level of contaminants that are in the space. So a more holistic ventilation system would be, instead of just throwing air through the building, as I said earlier on, assuming that it's cleaner than outside air, looking at ways to reduce levels of those contaminants of concern that we're trying to address. So rather than just sticking to dilution, moving towards more of a performance-based outcome. And in terms of why we're not doing it at the moment, back to D&B and lower cost. It's very simple to blow air through the building, and particularly in the UK with the climate we've got, it's not very hot, it's not very cold, so the energy penalty for doing so is not that big. So I think that's probably what's holding us back. There's not enough incentive to do it. There's more of an incentive to save money.
The age-old issue there. Dean, if I can come to you and the same question now about your understanding of why we call a holistic system and perhaps why or how we get there a bit more.
Yeah, I know. I think it's the same thing. It's about not just air coming into a building, it's about how we treat the air to make sure that it's clean and healthy for the participants that are needing to breathe it in. And obviously making sure it's draft free and correctly temperature controlled, and also taking noise into consideration as well, so it's not blowing a gale and deafening, so that it makes the whole environment both comfortable and healthy. I think we've already touched on some of the points, but it is based on, at the moment, just really meeting those minimum standards. There's a lot of copy and pasting of what's been done before, and too much reliance on the capital cost rather than the whole life costs of running a ventilation system and maintaining it, instead of focusing on the comfort and well-being of the people within the building. You know, with houses, the minimum is, for a new build house nowadays, would be a trickle vent and a toilet extract fan or kitchen extract fan. And as Nathan said in one of the previous sessions, it's installed by electricians that take a very short course and become competent people. So I think educating all of our sectors is going to help us take a more holistic view.
Lovely. And Claire, I can move to yourself and that question there, and your understanding of holistic and how it might work and what it means.
I think it's quite an interesting question, Neil, holistic, because I think holistic probably means different things to different people throughout the purchase chain. To a construction company, holistic will mean value engineering. To a building investor, holistic will mean building comfort and rentable rates. To an FM on site, holistic will mean what do I do to stop people moaning at me? And none of those things will really consider the fact that holistic really should mean how do we use natural air alongside mechanical systems to create an environment which is looking after energy consumption, so greener planet, looking after well-being and people, you know, particle control, pollution, getting rid of that horrible fresh air terminology that we all keep using about this indoor, outdoor air system. And I think also holistic should actually mean looking at buildings in isolation of not just what the building is, because, you know, if you look at UCL installed window mastering and pretty much manage their ventilation by air, wind and buoyancy and filtration. I think you've got to look at the buildings, the specific buildings, what they're, you know, is it old age buildings, old building stock that we need to retrofit? Is it new buildings, and stop giving that, you know, Dean pretty great there. That one size fits all approach to ventilation just needs to go away, in my opinion.
And Peter, we're talking about supply and value chains there as well, but how do you, from your part of the industry, sort of see how the idea of a holistic ventilation should be looked at, should be implemented, perhaps?
Well, I think it's very important to look at all the options and provide, obviously cost is a big driver, as you said. I'm never under any illusion. I think air filters are always a grudge purchase. People don't like spending a lot of money on air cleaning methods, particularly when you can't see particularly what they do. You know, we're talking about very small particles here, but I think the consequences of not paying due care and attention to what you're spending your money on are significant now, whereas before a lot of people didn't used to pay a lot of attention to fine particles in air. I think with air pollution and the risk of infection we currently are having, that we're all becoming, if you like, air quality experts, whether we like it or not. You know, if you said to someone a year ago, wear PPE, they wouldn't have had a clue what you're talking about. But now everybody's very much informed compared to what they were. We're still on a learning curve, but I think the technology is available now if you look for it. And I would say to everybody that you know, you can monitor and you can find out if you have a problem, and if you can come up with a control system that delivers, then go for it.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Adam, I come back to you there. It's and Peter sort of touched it there, but wanted to ask that age-old question somewhat here. Of if, and I suspect the questions, the answer's a bit more complicated than it looks. But is this really is this at its heart a technology issue, perhaps in terms of more automated systems, or is it a challenge of also policy and regulation? Sort of somewhere we've got to find the perfect bit in the middle of how all these different things sort of fit together. I was wondering where you sort of see that the impetus coming from.
Yeah, when I started out on my journey promoting clean air systems, I'd go along and speak to consultants who I've known for a long time, and they were like, yeah, that's very interesting, but that isn't going to get past VE. And building services consultants, it's all about compliance. And if instead of limits being placed on watts per litre per second, and therefore there's no reason particularly why you wouldn't bring in lots of air. If we had, this is a strange unit, watts per IEQ, watts per IEQ API, but if we were tying energy to delivering good indoor air quality in the best way possible, then people would probably look at it in more detail, and rather than go to the standard, okay, I'll put in 12, 20 litres a second through that building, I will, I will think about it a little bit more. I think, yeah, we need a bit more guidance in terms of regulation.
Dean, if I could come the same sort of question now on the issue of technology and policy and regulations and standards, the eternal question, where you sort of see that.
No, I think Adam made a really good point there about legislation is more focused on energy and other requirements rather than indoor air quality. So yeah, if there were other metrics that could be used to make sure that there's a balance between the two, you know, that would be brilliant. I think just adopting also new standards, filter standards have recently been improved. I say recently, within a couple of years, but they're still not adopted by many consultants, and they still refer to old standards. So it's about educating people within the supply chain about technology and how it can actually be embraced and improve what we're doing, rather than just doing the same thing over and over again.
And Claire, if I can come to you in the eternal question there.
I think data is an interesting one when because it depends whose hands that data's into, what they do with it, and often that again falls down to the FM if it's a current building that they're working in, or a consultant, and then it's about what they understand as a current regulation or policy, or and the other thing here is that many different things that people are, you know, you've got the carbon trust standards, you've got the government drives for zero emissions, you've got you know, the climate change piece around, you know, this 2 degrees Celsius change in environmental change. You've got all these different regulations and policy standards, SFG20, about how you maintain. There's no piece of ribbon that guides people through from construction to maintenance on what they should follow, and often the people making the decisions are guided by the people with the wrong data, and then any innovations that stand then almost lose impact because they're not in the right people's hands. I think it comes back to being able, as specialists, which you've got sitting on your panel here today, being able to get the message through, and that's really difficult.
And Peter as well.
Thank you. Yes, I would agree with Claire there. It is very difficult to get the message over. I've been trying to do it for about the last 10 odd years. But there are very good technical standards that are getting better all the time. Dean mentioned about the new filter standards, which ISO 16890 and ISO 10121-2 for particle filters and molecular filters. They've recently been improved. They're much more accurate now than previous standards and true to real life performance. And we've now got a good new standard that slips off the tongue, EN 16798-3, which covers and categorizes air and air quality. And that sets up a framework in conjunction with World Health Organization thresholds, if you like, which they give 10 micrograms per meter cube, for example, for PM 2.5 and 40 for NO2, and you can use those as factors to work out how good or bad your air quality is and calculate your required filter efficiency. So the toolbox is there. It's probably taking a while to sink in. You know, I'm aware that you know, these things aren't quite the sort of thing that a lot of people have a lot of time to spend on, but the essence of what is there to be used is in place. And as I say, testing and monitoring equipment now is relatively cheap compared to what it used to be. I say cheap, it's low cost. To get a good result, you know, if you can get a monitor to tell you how good or bad your air quality is, at least you know you've got a problem then, and you can take appropriate action.
I mean, this might be a bit of by Jobin's understanding of this as well. And coming to Claire for the next question to start, but when we talk of holistic, normally in building engineering, we're sort of talking about the theme almost of smart buildings, sometimes a dreaded term, smart controls, and linked systems there. I know you've mentioned data, but that issue of sort of the smart building and using, as you said, using the data we have, but using it to inform and better ensure systems are working as they need to in a building. What role does a smart building provide as a silver bullet solution perhaps to this as such, and what skills-wise issues does that present initially for industry as well? Is data and automated systems, are some of those words going to be more useful in kind of tackling where we are with this?
Smart buildings is a term I think a lot of people who know me know I hate, because is a
just to get you going on that one.
We could talk about it all day. I think there's a lot of technology, sensor technology, BMS, backpack to BMS, that have been around for a really long time in the industry. It's a bit like, you know, USB for PC was about for 10 years before we moved away from a serial connection, even though half of us struggled with female and male endings for years and years and years and just wouldn't take on that technology. That's the beast that we have to challenge. And I think it's the same with smart tech. And I think putting smart meters, it's the first question we should be asking ourselves is, what do we want to do with this data? What is the answer to the question that we're trying to find? And I think we end up with all this data, and then what do we want to do with it? So I think in terms of ventilation, there are some really smart things out there, you know, along with there's different motors and different drivers that we can put on that will be dust free, that will control particles in building management systems. There's zoning. There's articulation data through AI, so learning about a building in its current form rather than just talking about buildings generically, like I talked about previously. You know, I think we have to focus on, it's great having a spec to change your filter and make sure the quality of the filter is great, but if we're not measuring the air quality, how the hell do we know whether it's got better or not? And I think that's the piece for me. So it's all about the question that you want to answer, and I think that's where smart buildings come in. So you've got to have the specialist knowledge to understand what you're trying to solve, what you're trying to implement, and then you have to have the stakeholder buy-in to be able to change it. And I think that's the frustration in the curve. You've got people who are getting smarter here, but that doesn't necessarily mean the people who've got the cash want to spend the money to change it. And I think that's where the regulation piece comes in.
And we'll move to Dean, the same question now to challenge you on somewhat, there, but where does that factor in? You know, the somewhat buzzwords we've discussed.
I think that again, the smart building it's a term that has a really broad brush, but I think from a skills perspective, I think there's not really a skills gap, because as technology improves and increases, we've seen with lots of other trades that skills get dumbed down as we change to new and different techniques. And the more that things become connected to each other, and the easier that they can be connected and have open networks, etc., then the skills that we need to install and maintain those systems will become less needed and dumbed down. But I think there's a massive thing around data and what we use it for that could be linked to smart buildings, and in particular ventilation systems. Just air quality monitoring, if we were able to monitor the air going into a ventilation system from outside, we could collect lots and lots of data of how the air quality is within our cities and countryside from every single building, if we wanted to, if that data was available. And again, monitoring the air quality inside a building and how that changes throughout a working day or within somebody's home during a specific time. And you could then have self-learning systems that then can work in a way to predict what's going to happen and make sure that our buildings are safer from the start by knowing what's going to happen. So if a school, for example, opens its doors at 9 o'clock and children are coming in, and then they all go into the hall for assembly or etc., then the building will start to learn what happens and make sure that there's enough air, clean and the right quality air in the building in the areas where it's needed. And I think that's how we can use that data better to make sure that we're providing the right amount of air, and we can also use the right amount of air where it's needed and reduce our energy costs at the same time. So I think that's the holistic view of how that data could be used.
Nice tie together, Peter. From your view there, in terms of what we've been discussing there about technology and the changing nature of how data may inform and sort of help with learning systems.
Yeah, I think if you want to make advance, you've actually got to find out what the problem is. And at the moment, we've got a problem where quite a few buildings have ventilation systems that are not always effective in all parts of the building, and we've had guidance recently coming out to say that if you don't have good ventilation, don't use that part of the building, which would obviously indicate in order to find out you've got to actually do a bit of monitoring. So we have to make sure that that people are aware of how bad the problem is and they can take appropriate action. And I've certainly done a lot of building profiling over the years, and you get tremendous variation. If you're talking about outdoor air coming into the building, the entrance hall of an office block and the ground floor quite often have significantly higher levels of ingress of air pollution from outdoors than, say, the 6th or 7th floor of the building. And the same thing would apply, of course, to infected areas. If you've got people carrying an infection wherever they work, if it happens to be an area of poor ventilation as well, then you get a very much higher risk than if it is well ventilated with plenty of air changes. So this is where there has to be proper detailed investigation, really, so that appropriate action can be taken and build people's confidence levels. I mean, whenever I go visiting anywhere, I'm always carrying at least one air monitor, but I'm a bit of an anorak in that respect, I suppose.
That's the right day for that, certainly. Adam, come to you on that issue.
Yeah, a massive opportunity with all this the data that is available, and going back to what Dean was saying about machine learning. Building ventilation systems have typically, or HVAC systems have been very reactive to what's just happened and always playing catch up. But now we know what the weather's going to be like in advance, and we also know what the air quality is going to be like in advance. So with these systems, we can use that to enhance total building performance. And that's not just about energy. There are big energy savings to be made if you can work with the thermal mass of your building and not be running your plant at 100%, but also for indoor environment quality as well, keeping the temperature under control and knowing that a pollution event is coming, and making hay while the sun shines, and maybe dropping the CO2 level down in your building ahead of a pollution event. It's a huge opportunity. With regards to the skills in the industry, I don't think the industry is big enough to require the skills yet, but it's going to require a lot of people being trained in it fairly quickly, and I think a lot of that is going to be driven by COVID.
Interesting. I was going to ask, actually, tying into that, and I'll start with Peter on this, but as an extension of the earlier session where we are now, look at the idea of innovation from a technical standpoint now. What role do manufacturers such as yourselves, what role does innovation still need to play? I mean, we talked about some of the technologies, we've got sensors and many of the things there, but what should innovation, I guess, look like from industry to begin to try and make this more viable, so to support installers and vice versa, to be able to take it?
Certainly, it approaches from several different directions. I mean, as you mentioned, air monitoring and knowing what the scale of the problem is a key thing in order so you can provide the appropriate solution. But we as manufacturers, we've certainly stepped up our research into providing what I would term low energy air filters. So you get more for less in terms of air cleaning capability. And a lot of that focuses on the pressure drop of the air filters when they're operating. If you do a comparison test, you can have, you know, a panel filter that has a 3% efficient PM1 removal rate, but has more of an energy consumption than a bag filter that will remove 20 times more of the particulate and have a lower energy consumption. So to say that, you know, selection of filters is, for example, not important is, you know, you're really missing the point, because you can have a, you know, a very good, well-selected, well-designed system that can be 3, 4 or more times more effective and efficient in terms of energy reduction than something that where people just haven't bothered. You know, they've just gone out and bought what I would call a commodity filter without examining the consequences. And this is where life cycle costing comes in, as well as selection. It's cost to run. And, you know, for example, the BESA, Building Engineering Services Association, have a selection of data sheets that cover, you know, selection of air filters and life cycle costing and air quality benchmarking, which give good background guidance. And the guidance is out there if you look for it, but that's it. You've got to actually look for it and read it.
Seems to be that part of the challenge we're discussing somewhat today. Dean, if I come to you on that issue of innovation as well, if it's not too much simplifying the wider complexities we talked about, where would you see from Swagon's role about where that needs to come from, or where perhaps it's already being focused?
I think the virus has given us a great opportunity to educate people. There's webinars every single day on lots of different topics that are virus related, and you'll see that a lot of them actually talk about ventilation, and I think it's really given us a place to be able to talk about what's good about ventilation, what's good about filtration, the right airflow rates and everything else. So I think education is educating our customers and the building users and the FM and the designers is where innovation is going to come. You look at things like the Well Building Standard, I think that's going to just grow and grow and grow, and part of the requirements to meet those standards will also help innovation within our industry and change the way that we do things and think about not just meeting the standard regulations, but actually pushing the envelope a bit further and thinking of different systems to provide a good ventilation system and a good indoor air quality, but also how do we do that efficiently. And you know, the other things that are going on in whole life carbon and net zero buildings and everything else, all are going to go hand in hand. So I think we will have to do things a lot better in the future, and we've just what's going on at the moment is actually going to help us do that.
Adam, I want to come to you as well, though, on the innovation.
So I think there's a lot of technology out there, but I think it's out of reach for most buildings. So I think we need to kind of replicate what you get in motorsport with amazing things happening in Formula One, and then it trickles down to everyday vehicles. I mean, if we take the humble extract fan, we would have before just turned on and off with the light. Then we get run-on timers, then we can get humidistat on them. And then the latest ones with VOC sensors as well. It's they're kind of small innovations, but it's all trickled down from other aspects of buildings. So if we can see more of that feeding down from these very high-end buildings, or dare I say government buildings, and we invest in these publicly funded buildings to really make them try a bit harder. And spend public money on buildings like that to try and improve ventilation across the board.
Claire, is that something that from your side that you were sort of seeing playing out as well, or are there other areas you think could be prioritised in that degree?
I think I agree with I agree with all these guys. It's almost like there's lots of innovation, lots of technology, and I think the biggest decision is choosing one particular setting. Talking about the school where you manage incoming, children. We do that in a lot of corporate buildings where we count people in, but you've got to remember we counted them in, but did we count them out? Have they gone to meetings? Are they all sitting at their desk? Could we be using a simple PRI sensor to say they're actually at their desk? There's lots of different pieces of technology, and it's about the jigsaw puzzle of putting together that particular building on whether you get results or not. And I think AI for that piece of, them backpacks that we can put onto the back of BMSs and read from sensors to help us learn about that specific building's environment, I think is going to be really, really important for driving forward. And that's going to take some appetite from the FM community to really want to push that change through. And I think it's coming slowly. It's gaining some momentum, and that's really exciting for the specialists out there, because I think the likes of us sitting on this panel, that will give us that kind of key communication back with those building managers that will help them make those right decisions.
It's interesting. We've got a few audience questions, some of them on specific technologies, and sort of saying, can we ask the panel, ultraviolet and different technologies coming in. But I think some of the questions are, is this one going to work? Is this one not? But it doesn't seem, obviously, the solutions we're looking at here it's not a one solution technology. It's the classic. There's not really a silver bullet here per se that's going to play out if that's kind of right from the panel's perspective.
I think
sorry, Claire.
I think it's that particular building's environment, its construct, its pathology, all those things will lead to what technology you should be implementing to get the outcome that you want once you know what that outcome or challenge is.
So it really is those sort of case studies, I guess, are going to be quite an important part of that one as well. And I think moving to sort of conclusions and things with the panel, though, I think one of the questions, and we'd asked it to the previous panel as well there, and we've had it in a few questions, is about end user engagement, particularly the role or the understanding that an end user moving in, whether it's a new building, whether it's buying an old place, whether it's a renter. What is I guess, and if I can start with Adam there, and again, it's is it awareness? What do we need, or what role again can the end user have when we talk of the holistic view of that? Where do they perhaps need to be aware, or what role even do the building users, occupiers need to sort of play in this system we talked about?
Well, yeah, people are going to be demanding good air quality. And I mentioned earlier on about air quality sensors being available in people's phones. Now, how good those are going to be, I think when that happens and people start wearing air quality sensors, I think it's going to create a lot of headaches for FM companies and building owners when people walk into a building and go, look, this is no good, and people become more aware of air quality standards. And yeah, the whole COVID thing is going to make people look into it. So that again needs to be regulated, but it might be a case that building owners need to put in air quality monitoring to sort of quash those problems before they happen and show, look, we're doing it properly. You've just gone and bought something off of the internet. We're actually recording it and we're monitoring it and sort of solving the problem before it arises. But I can see people keeping records of what their air quality was in terms of future litigation. If someone has worked for 10 years in an unhealthy building and we find out from testing that what they were exposed to has caused problems, then it could be the next asbestos. So I think, yeah, people may start driving, the users of the buildings may start driving that. By being more aware.
Oh, sorry, Adam.
By being more aware, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. The thing I would mention is that, do look at the test standards, see, the standards, BSI, CEN, ISO standards have been put together by the world's experts, certainly for air filtration and ventilation equipment design. Go to references and standards that you can rely on, and indeed make sure that any equipment you're selecting, designing has been properly tested, and when it's specified, you can do so in confidence. I'm talking now about larger projects, of course. If you're talking about a guy who wants to buy something for his home, then again, he needs to look for something which will show him the latest standards that are recommended. And I say BSI, CEN and ISO are the world's experts in this respect, and to look for World Health Organization referencing. They're the experts on health matters, and be guided by guidance from good sources. I mentioned Eurovent, BESA, Feta HVAC, BISRIA. All these people are engaged in trying to improve the way things are done, and it's well worth getting information from several sources and get the best possible guarantee of performance you can, and not just what the equipment does, but energy costs and running costs.
Dean, coming from that, where we've obviously got the standards Peter was mentioning there. So, how does that to the end user level, to the occupier, as the person who's opening the windows at the minute? How do we sort of move that along, I guess?
Yeah, I think employers and building owners have a duty of care. Employers obviously have a duty of care to their staff, and if we're looking at commercial buildings where people work, if we do get back into the offices, Adam made a great point about air quality monitoring. But if employers and building owners for public buildings actually could monitor the air and display the air quality, and even show how it's improved over a time because of actions that they've taken, then that's a fantastic way of showing that employers are doing the right things, or building owners are doing the right things to make sure that the buildings are safe from an air quality perspective.
And Claire, if I can come to you on that as well there.
I think I agree with Dean. I think where we went to 14 building owners and occupants to display energy ratings of their buildings and what they were doing around energy, we should be going the same way on indoor air quality, to heighten that whole, not just from owners and FMers and investors, but also from the average person walking through the door and their safety. I think it's fundamental that we start to publicise what indoor air quality. I mean, if you look at asthma in schools at the moment, and asthma in polluted areas, it's fatal to our children's future. I mean, and BESA are working on the children's bill at the moment, and indoor air quality is a topic that's infiltrating that bill quite heavily, because of the fact that this should be about safeguarding our children's future, especially with some of those buildings where indoor air quality is our hospitals, our schools, our nurseries, the oldest buildings that we want to look at, where we retrofit systems where we can't do things because it's value engineering and not because of well-being.
I mean, I guess we're coming more or less to the end of the panel, so I'm going to, from my illustrious editor, take his lead here and ask for the classic, in a single sentence or two, what we'd see. And I appreciate 2020's been a pretty unprecedented year, but in a sense of from where we are now in a year's time, when we talk about moving towards holistic solutions, if I could just ask each of the panels where they'd hope we'd perhaps be from now in a year's time, where we may see some changes, some move forward to getting some of these issues addressed. So if I start from Adam and make the way back through, if that's possible, what would have been that as succinct as it's possible to be on this? What would you hope to be?
I think my little tagline: assess, remediate, maintain. It's a journey, and I think the first thing is going to be increased awareness, and that's going to be more people measuring what their air quality is like, and just generally an increased awareness. That's what I would like to see and expect to see.
And I suppose you said, I guess with COVID this year, that does give an unfortunate but impetus nonetheless to be able to engage people on that and what's going in and what's going out of buildings particularly. Dean, if I can come to you on your view on that one.
Yeah, I think along with the awareness, also educated, even with air being such a topic at the moment, people will become more educated as well as aware of what the air quality is like within a building.
Claire, if that's possible to ask you.
I think communication and specialism and understanding that, you know, you have to engage. You talked about guidance and education and knowledge, and that's about us as specialists stepping up and being active in our community, in our facilities management community, to make that message and make sure that it's the importance of that message is heard. And I think that's the bit for me. So all the people listening in, you know, talk about air quality. Go out there, talk about it. That's what needs to happen.
Brilliant. And Peter, yourself, building on that?
I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I would just say that cleaner air is safer air. We want air that can be breathed without risk to health, and you know, more monitoring, better solutions that not necessarily are going to be that much more expensive in a lot of cases. So make the best of what you've got.
It's good advice to finish on with that one. Well, thank you so much to our panel. I think we've more or less corralled that in perfect timing as well. There's many more questions I wish we could have got to, so apologies for the rambling somewhat on that, but thank you once again for the panel. It's been a great help there today. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's lovely. Now I'm reliably informed via our my summit transcription sheet that we are moving to the final session today, hopefully ahead of you all guys getting a nice lunch, but it's the theme of tying things together. So we'll be looking at some of the key outcomes from the session and perhaps as an industry where we need to go forward. So hopefully propping me up with some of this intelligent insight, I'm pleased to bring back Nathan Wood and HV News editor Andrew David as well. So thanks for joining me, and particularly coming in from our discussion on holistic approaches and innovation there. I think there's probably plenty to talk about, not least some of the interesting insights there about now beginning to educate the public and then moving on as well. I think.
So shall I cut straight in? Shall I cut straight in, as is my wont, Neil?
If you have something, I did have a question for Nathan, but if you've got something you were going to add, please do.
Well, I was just now, for the benefit of the audience, this is an unusual situation where I'm having to do what Neil asked me to do. So forgive us for any banter that goes on. But I was just going to introduce what we envisaged the session to be, which is really just another chance to grab Nathan, get more of his thoughts, and try and roll in a little bit about what we've learned. But I mean, I guess from our point of view at H&V, it's what can the industry do next? What can we do to get people moving? And that's, we've heard so much today. I've already got a notepad full of stuff, writing down all the things that have been talked about. But I mean, very loosely headed in 4 different themes, and that's standards, education, innovation, and then the one that didn't quite come up so much, but I think, Nathan, I'm hoping you've got a view on, is collaboration. Something that came out of the low carbon heating last week is about getting everybody in the industry to get out of their silos and work together. So yeah, I mean, from my point of view, it was going to be probably what Neil has already said, just about to ask is, yeah, what do you think the main thing that has come out from today is?
Yes, collaboration, interesting. I mentioned this last year. So you could say, what have I seen change in the last 12 months? Well, probably before COVID. I'm seeing lots of innovation from smaller startups, mainly from people that did work for big industries that have left, probably with a group of other guys from the same companies or similar companies, and set up some fantastic air quality monitors, clean air tech, training schemes, building standards. They're trying to push, there's a group of guys putting together across from Europe that's putting together an immune building standard, open source, free. You know, you don't have to sign up to it. You don't have to jump through hoops. You know, it's there for everybody to try and adopt. So certainly we do need to collaborate. And I think that the main industry leaders, certainly in the ventilation and air conditioning industry, are starting to make changes. I think COVID will certainly speed things up. The fact that they now have got more of a focus on the problem and what they need to do to address that. It's not just a spin on existing technologies. So yes, collaboration is key. but we've also got to address the massive skill shortage as well. I mean, just trying to address the energy consumption, so the energy monitor meters installations and stuff like that. You know, we're failing there already. So we're now onto another area of trying to address indoor air quality. And certainly, you know, we've been in the ventilation game for 18 years, indoor air quality for around 5. And I'm still learning every day. Every day's a school day, as they say. And there's lots of people that are coming out of the woodwork as specialists and with all of these different ideas. And without proper standards that take too long to come forward, they're able to manipulate the market. And I think that as long as people are clever and do a little bit of due diligence and look into the background of the company, how long they've been established, who they work for, what accreditations have they got, what associations do they belong to, then they'll get more of a feeling for who they're looking at working with. I think for schools, they're a completely different area. They have no money. You know, they're having to pay for additional cleaners at the moment, which is breaking the bank when they should be investing in our children's education. That one aside, then we've got, you know, your smaller offices, your outfits that need to be looking at what they're actually doing in-house. You know, I mean, certainly for our small office in Kent, we ventilate it. We've got clean air technology. We've got the screens up. We're separated. We wear masks in communal areas. In our fleet, we won the HV News Health Initiative of the Year last year for the air purifiers and clean air tech that we put into our engineers' vans. So there's lots of things that we can be doing that is affordable, that is achievable. I mean, I'm just an SME, small company, and we've been able to do it. But I think because we're small, we were able to react to changes a lot quicker and a lot easier. I think it's all going to come down to a willingness to make changes. And again, touching on a point that Adam said, is that it's going to become the next asbestos. If you refer back to my original video, and the reason that I put those two videos together was to really get at people's hearts, to really, you know, explain to people this does have a direct effect on your health and well-being. So Ella's death that was touched on the last clip of the video, that is still going through the courts, and I do believe that her death certificate will be changed from asthma to air pollution. She'll become the first person in the UK for that to happen. And then that will open the doors. There's so many people every year, every day, that die as a direct result of poor indoor air quality and poor outdoor air quality, but the cause of death is the secondary part. That's what might have killed them, but what caused that problem? A 15 minutes exposure to ultrafine particles will remain in your body for up to 3 months in your blood and your urine. If it's in your blood, it's in every single organ in your body. But ultrafine particles and most air pollution that we talk about isn't tangible. So again, it's that out of sight, out of mind. So how do you make the invisible visible? You need to monitor it. You need to collate that data and represent it. Sorry, Neil.
No worries. Apologies. It was to do with the campaigning around Ella's cause of death and the campaigning of Mother, which I know Beast has been working with as well. I was wondering, in terms of you mentioned it would be the first time in the UK there, but have there been any case studies, Europe or elsewhere, where that's happening? Perhaps where they're perhaps ahead of us in that sense, in campaigning with leading. Actually, well, you know, there is now a demonstrable, sort of tangible health impact of this, where perhaps that might already being discussed, perhaps in a way where we're a little behind still in terms of getting the understanding on that.
Yeah, more than likely. I'm not aware of any specific cases, but I would imagine so. We're always behind other countries, unfortunately, with most things. So I would imagine, yes, it is there and it is happening. But certainly, I feel that the main reason I wanted to use Velux's video is the fact that they don't ram a product down your throat. The only time that you see any mention of a Velux window is when the guy's cutting out a section of the roof. I did actually get the video edited to remove the word fresh in there as well. A lady opens up the windows in the full film. But it just hammers home the point of, you know, children's bedrooms are normally the most highly polluted places in your home because of the plastics and the toys and the furnishings and everything else. So we should be pulling at people's heartstrings, and I think with the public, their heart is a better place to aim, whereas with business, it seems to be the pocket. So I feel as an industry, we're very, very good at talking to each other and saying, you know, you're doing great things, well done, look at me, I'm in this magazine this month. However, we need to break out of this mold and get the public excited, annoyed, almost the rebellion style, to make sure that we can break the information through, so then they start to lead for changes.
Do you think that, I was just, sorry Nathan, I was just going to, with serendipity, I was just about to say exactly the same word. Do you think that COVID is really focused, I mean, obviously it's focused people's minds, but it's focused people's minds on ventilation? Not necessarily, they're not necessarily very well educated on the subject, or most of them aren't. And I think that's caused problems of its own, hasn't it? But it does have, you know, the interesting thing, I guess, from your point of view, is that the asthma campaign was starting to really build. You're getting, you know, some good coverage there. And then COVID happened, and then, you know, then it's really put the highlighter on the problems of poor ventilation.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, where I'm based in Kent, there's a local school that's working with UNICEF because it's an at-risk school because of the local agriculture. You know, we're in office probably 3 miles away, and our problems that we monitor mostly is from local industries. I'll be careful now. Local industries at night polluting under the cover of darkness.
Right.
So there's lots going on that we're not aware of. And as I say, there's a DEFRA approved air quality monitoring station in an air quality management area monitored by our council. And all they have to do is monitor it and put the data on a website. So go out, look where you live, look for your local air quality management areas, look for these little silver boxes and tubes that are hanging up on lampposts around your area, and look to see what the air quality is like. Would you buy a home if you knew that it was in a more polluted area? If Ofsted start to regulate air quality in schools, would you choose to send your child to a polluted school because they've got good grades, or would you choose to send somebody else down the road? So I think it needs to be all-consuming in our daily lives, because we can't get away from breathing.
The Ofsted thing's quite interesting as well. I've been speaking for covering particularly air quality as a whole outdoors, but indoor as well, about that idea that at some point monitoring and public awareness of this will create problems in terms of buying properties, where the areas you move, as you were sort of saying, that actually air quality can feasibly, even don't know how long it may take, but suspect that will become much more an issue in the key decision making of how people live, where they live, particularly with children and families as well. I mean, it was interesting. One of the questions we've been getting from the audience earlier somewhat, and actually it had been mentioned, Claire, as well in the first panel, about the Green Homes Grant, if I can say at this point. The government finally taking some initiative on getting energy efficiency in buildings dealt with, sealing it up and putting some money in for that. But actually, the already, is there a theme that perhaps we needed that to be factored into the Green Homes Grant somewhat already, about, you know, we've talked about the health impacts of that, but making buildings more airtight. Should that not have also immediately been considered? Have we missed a trick by not having that in some of the key initiatives government have put about build better, that we haven't already begun to at least consider that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's shocking that we're expecting the government to come forward with this really good guidance on what needs doing, but their only consuming point was energy conservation. They didn't take into account the fact that if you seal up a building, the amount of problems that you can cause from the back of that in terms of the air quality. I mean, it also comes into play of how people live within their buildings as well. You spoke about with Claire on the first presentation, in terms of you couldn't really tell somebody how to live in their own home. But if that home is social housing, then certainly there needs to be a minimum standard of air quality that is provided for those people. There's a massive issue with people in poor areas, in poor demographics and poor air quality, and they're higher risk for COVID. You know, there's lots of documents about that. So I mean, I'm aware of several housing associations that just firefight problems. They do not maintain ventilation systems, and it's wrong. It shouldn't be the case. Again, I feel like I'm sort of causing a bit of trouble and saying the things that people don't want to hear, but I feel that this
That's
is
why
what
you're on,
summits are about.
Nathan.
Yeah,
That's why you're
exactly. You know, it's not a case of naming and shaming. It's just about making this information clear that people are doing the bare minimum for social housing. You know, and people living in care homes. We've done some inspections of care homes, and the ventilation systems are so antiquated. In hotels, the front of house is amazing. You go out the back, and it's a completely different story. But again, we've been speaking to an organisation that does online bookings, and they're saying that is there a way that we could get a clean air policy? So when you're booking a hotel, would you like 3-star, 5-star parking? Would you like clean air? You know, when we start to see that come through and it becomes more mainstream.
It's interesting. I don't know whether you're familiar with the Times has got is running a clean air campaign, and they seem to have percolated it quite well through the paper, because the property section has when it says, you know, the weekend come and move to name a place far away from Kent, just to avoid bias. Morecambe. It now says something about the air quality rating, so they're clearly trying to be holistic about that. But I mean, it strikes me that that's the kind of thinking that we need as an industry to try and get to the people that we talk with. Yeah,
certainly. I mean, in schools, in more modern academies and such, with the new building bulletins, they have a traffic light indicator for CO2. It's just, you know, a smiley face, not so much, and a sad face. But the amount of times we visited the places, we just turn that off. It's an annoyance to us. We just turn it off. And it's because they haven't got an understanding. They don't understand the reasons for that. So I think the main pollutant that schools look at is CO2 because it causes drowsiness, affects your cognitive behaviour, etc. But in terms of being able to understand it better, why can't it be introduced into the curriculum? You know, that would be an amazing way. Some of the presentations that I've given to local schools, they've been so receptive. One of them actually went on a few years back to go and meet Michael Gove the next day at the time. And I asked them to say to him, it's no yoke, and to take eggs, and they all took eggs with them. Because children developing in polluted areas will have reduced lung function by as much as 2 average-sized chicken eggs. And that's from King's College. So you tell people these things. I mean, again, I'm the crazy guy about clean air, but you tell your friends and your family these things, and they just go, gosh, that's crazy. Don't go about their normal lives.
It's interesting, isn't it, Nathan? We were thinking when we were putting this program together, HV had its first indoor air quality event in 2016, and we talked quite a lot about what we should do and working together. There is some progress, so I don't want to be entirely pessimistic. I think things have changed, but it's about getting that that sort of critical mass together, isn't it? It's what can we do? I'm asking out loud, to try and get a real voice behind this separate approved document lobbying. Because that strikes me as, the one way to get. Unfortunately, the Grenfell inquiry has proved that approved documents aren't read by many in the industry, but at least it'll be read by some in the industry if we can get something that focuses, it really homes in on IAQ as a, and it's not, so it ceases to be about specification, it's about guidance.
Well, with the works that we're doing at BESA and the Wellbeing Committee, we're trying to get a meeting together, and we have actually spoken during lockdown with BEMA and a few other organisations to come together, because BESA's quite heavily on the construction side, BEMA's more of the domestic side, and we were both angling on the same thing. So we have spoken about combining our efforts and these APPGs to push forward with a common voice to try and make a louder voice pushed through. But that's slowly. That's a slowly thing. Things do take time.
Yeah.
I was going to say, actually, Nathan, as a point of synergy, I know Ian McCaskey's made a note that actually that BETA itself's working on, with partners in the UK, developing a suite of what it calls national occupational standards that would be specifically aimed at facilities management. So I know we'll be putting that out as well for people, because I know they're looking at the moment for responses and things to how that's formed around there. But I think interestingly as well, when you talk about from the 4 years from 2016 onwards, and I think you look at something like recycling and how over a couple of decades that's changed to it being something that the Europeans did, and seems almost something that, well, that's not in our nature to separate waste, and that's the broader awareness tied into different health issues, tied into different societal issues, has seen a real change there nationally. Now that has taken time. I appreciate this is in some ways equally as drastic that we cover an interesting, perhaps with talk from Claire in the last panel about the need as well to begin to perhaps publicise this, and that it's almost you hammer away the repetition of the message that this really needs to start being taken properly now, and then you'll get that buy-in, I guess, particularly probably through young people, as you were saying, campaigning and then building that up through awareness of people.
Yeah, I mean, even the BBC News is doing big presentations on ventilation now. Unfortunately, the presenter used the term fresh air quite a lot, so I was screaming in my seat. But, for the BBC and other broadcasters and papers to start to be trickling this out, I see that as a fantastic sign. And, again, friends and family saying, did you watch that last night? You do that sort of thing. But again, I feel that people don't associate ventilation products and air movement in their home as being important. It's more about how it looks, how you move throughout that building. I mean, in terms of, everybody's been mentioning the well standard and wellness, is what we're talking about. And a bit like what Adam said, I did actually Google wellness, and it's the active pursuit of activities, choices, and lifestyles to have a healthy and fulfilled life. Well, to have any health, you do need to be breathing clean air. So I think from what everybody's been saying on the panel in terms of, yes, we need to do this, we need to do that. As an industry, we know to do that, but I think we need to scream from the rooftops to break out of our shell, break out of our comfort zone, and start speaking to people. Talk to your friends, talk to your family. Webinars are a fantastic thing now that everybody's got used to. We can host these, but it's how do you get engagement from the public to push it forward? And I think with Ella's case and what's going through there, that's surely gonna meet headlines. But will it make any change? It does to me, because I'm passionate about air quality and what we do, and to my team, we're passionate about air quality. It's where it leads. Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the challenges that we face is, as you said in your very opening statement earlier this morning, the UK is in breach of its legal responsibilities on outdoor air. So clearly, in a very empirical way, we can say it's not a priority at the moment. So it's about trying to square that circle. It's trying to have a grassroots campaign, but also to keep tilting government policy. To try and also to join the dots a little bit, to keep the metaphors coming. Let's go back to COVID. You must have dealt with quite a lot of companies. Well, I know you have, because there's one known to both of us, where they're calling you in and saying, well, what can we do? Because nobody knows. And, just anecdotally in our company, funnily enough, if you're in an H&B magazine, people ask you, what are we doing about going back to the office? And it then becomes that must be repeated across the country. What is going on in the office? And it then becomes a question of, do we have to start certifying? What's the view on that?
So we've been called to lots of different places, and I still am very much going out and visiting places myself. And what I quite often find is it comes down to cost.
Yeah.
But you need, even for our office, we found that we can work remotely. We continue to work remotely through that, but it's just that office environment picking up on jobs that are going on, and if things go wrong, working together as a team and that team effort. So certainly our building needed to reactivate. Other companies won't need to reactivate, or if they do, it can be in smaller numbers. But if they've never been concerned about the air quality before, they haven't put a price on it. So I think George Friend has said before, people don't account for clean air and the cost for maintaining clean air. So when we do visit these places, sometimes I'm in complete shock and we actually leave the building, even though there's nobody in there, we leave because it's drawing air in from a car park or a main road outside. And the more you dig into it, their fire compartmentation doesn't meet regulations. So you open up a complete can of worms, and it's almost like you're causing them a problem. You're trying to offer them a solution, but you cause them a headache. Other places are very good. Their maintenance and their cleaning regimes are on point. They've changed their filters. They've looked into detail. So I think it's a case of people need to start and allow a budget for clean air and what needs to be addressed. Clean air technologies, people have been mentioning UV, HEPA filters, there's electrostatic, there's all sorts of different wonderful systems coming forward. Again, massively under-regulated. So look into the history of the product, look into the test data. It's the same with ventilation systems. You know, what a fan will do on a desk is one thing. What it will do with, you know, only 300 mil of duct and a gravity-fed flap on the back of it is a lot less.
Sorry, Nathan, there's been a bit of on that point, there's been a bit of a gold rush, hasn't there, in the technologies coming out or being repurposed in some cases, which are purported to solve the problem. And it's a little bit, how do you find your way through the mists?
It's hard. It is hard. I mean,
literally the mists. That was a terrible pun by accident.
I'll let you off.
We weren't going to.
No. So during lockdown, as things were starting to really lock down, I was able to still go to my office. It's not far from where I live. And I was being sent lots of tech to talk about, to try and sort of publicise it and push with it. I have actually only gone with one technology now. I won't name them, but certainly the reason why I only went with that technology was because of the long-term history, the backing of where the technology came from, the test data that was openly available, and please do have a look at it and push us for it. That technology has now gone global to a global team, and I'm part of that journey. So I'm not going to be biased for any product. All I'll say is there's lots of things out there that work. Whether they work well in a massive room with a 4-meter high ceiling and 60 people in it is another thing. So you can't just buy an off-the-shelf item, put it on the wall, put it on the floor, turn it on, and it's going to work wonders in accordance to the test certificate. It needs to form part of a ventilation strategy. And certainly even our own office, we're waiting for more equipment to come through so we can change our ventilation strategy. And it's not going to look very nice, but it's something that we need to do. We've got to overlook that, and it's for the benefit of our employees. And again, it will come down, as I think you said, Neil, to a duty of care. However, the HSE do need to step up and start and address issues before COVID, and then looking forward as well.
The COVID thing's quite interesting, I guess, because I know Beast has been doing a lot about the initial reports we were having. I think it was Guangdong and stories about what, you know, is ventilation good? Is ventilation bad? What role does it play in this? When the actual the longer term narrative about what was really happening was, it was actually the system could manage it. It was more finally people asking about how a system is being used. So I guess when we talk about COVID in that sense of understanding what you were saying about understanding how a building works and what the specific needs are, I suppose we have to use kind of COVID as a way now to try and engage and say, well, actually, it's about as you said, technologies are there and can handle what's needed, but it's now about a building by building, case by case sort of basis of what does a building need, rather than, as you always, Bisa says, the tick box approach of, well, that's been fulfilled, that's there, so my job's done. Actually, what is it doing, I guess, now to just ensure that the air I breathe is safe in the broad term of it?
Well, I started saying during the lockdown that COVID has made air pollution visible to the world, and I certainly will stand by that. And in terms of what we do going forward, and not just being a tick box exercise, we do need to take an approach to a building by building basis, not just on the building, but the actual use of it inside as well, how it is used. we're talking with a lot of schools, and I'm hoping to work with more, but because they haven't got the money. There are some amazing systems out there that the children could develop as part of their curriculum and be used in that building. Google recipes, if this then that, IFTTT. It's the kiddies' toy playground. For what some of our apprentices have done, just blown me away. And I'm going, well, we could take this into schools, and this could be introduced into the curriculum. It's the same as, BMS engineers. It's that dark art with their laptops sitting in the corner of a plant room, doing their thing with knobs and whistles and whatever else. It's clever, but it could be so simplistic with a few simple smart tech items. So again, you've got the lower end schools with no budget. You've got the high end flagship buildings in London, which probably have got quite a big budget. They're worried about people bringing people back into it, because it's us that are the very risk that's coming back in. Yes, you need to look at your cleaning regime. What products are you using? What effect will they have on your staff? It may be that out of a whole floor of 100 people, they may not know, but 3 people have got asthma or COPD. So increasing the cleaning regime of their desk, it might be best if they actually stay and work from home. I mean, in theory, if they've got COPD, they should be working from home. Should be, yeah. But when people are working from home, so if I asked my staff to work from home, whose duty of care are they under? Are they lone working? Do I need a separate risk assessment for that? Is their desk ergonomic? I mean, I've had to come up my father's today because the internet at work is unreliable at the moment. So certainly where I'm sitting, I couldn't work here every day because I would have a bad back. And then will the claim culture start there?
And following up from that, there's a point made on the question and answers just now, is that if we encourage people more, as in the public, to look at their own air quality by having, these easily affordable air monitors, just as a start, it would at least make people aware what the issues are that we're talking about. Because I think within the industry, one of the things I was going to mention was that the Royal College of Physicians report that we all got very exercised about 3 years ago. There we go. Because it's got a lot of data, and a lot of very scary data on what's going on. Interesting enough, there was quite a feeling that there was only one chapter on IAQ, and the proportion was very telling back in 2017. I think that is changing, which is good. But it talked about VOCs, and nobody really in the public understands what a VOC is, or what it does, or what its effect is. And I think, making air quality more of a talking point in general is back to what we were saying.
Yeah.
But I guess to kind of draw a little bit of a circle, what is, the whole COVID experience is putting the focus back on expertise and having people who can help you. And that comes back to the industry, and it comes back to competence. So it's an opportunity for the HVAC industry to really cement its place, but at the same time, as you said again at the beginning, competence in ventilation. And without wishing to harken back to 2016 all the time, our first issue of the new HME News, its lead story was a big report from the Carbon Zero Homes or something like that. One of these government bodies that no longer exists, but it had a whole scathing attack on ventilation and new build sites. And the key takeaway was no one is really competent, but they're all going in and fitting the ventilation. Now, as you say, there are competence schemes, but it really needs us as an industry to get together and focus on making it a proper specialism.
Yeah, exactly. The good thing that came about, I think I was at that one of the first the meeting that you mentioned. I believe that BEMA was there then, and a few of the key partners from the ventilation manufacturers. And I was really excited to hear about this new standard that was coming through. And certainly, if you were inspected and you didn't meet the grade, you wouldn't just lose your ventilation competence, you would lose any other competence that you hold with that authority. I've not heard of anybody being taken to task over it. And certainly the inspection that we had, They didn't even ask to see the equipment or question our engineer in any way, shape or form that would actually test their knowledge, even if they just swatted up on the book beforehand. It should be that if somebody comes to work on your boiler in your home, you should ask for their skills card, their proof of competence before they do anything. It should be that for the ventilation system. It really should come down to, I feel, a single authority or a couple of authorities that are actually able to say, right, we're gonna train you up now. You're going to do so many hours theory, so many hours installation. Then we're going to come and test that. Then you're going to come and do an installation at our test place. It's going to cost a few £1,000s for you to do it, but that's what it costs to put an electrician through a proper course. You know, I'm actually interviewing tomorrow for 3 new apprentices, and they do a 3.5 to 4 year advanced modern apprenticeship at a proper training centre. They're more of a pain to us in the beginning than cheap labour as other people see them as. But when they come through as a green technician, they're mouldable. You can channel them to where you want them to go. And without question, 2 that we've got at the moment are going to start working with smart tech and little Google recipes, Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and stuff like that.
I think, Jen, so it's probably quite a good point. I know the idea of the session was tying it together anyway, but I think that's probably naturally brought us to the calls for where industry needs to go, where we need to go, perhaps as a magazine as well in terms of looking at this. So thank you for the last session in particular, but the whole morning as well, Nathan, and to all the panelists we've had today as a whole, and hopefully this has all been gives us quite a good start, not just a magazine, but as an industry, I think, to look forward now on how we start moving forward, how we start getting people in a more campaign mindset that's probably going to be needed to before COVID anyway to move ahead with this one.
Do let us know if there's any if you have any comments out there in the audience. We'll share them with the speakers, but also, you know, for the magazine, we do like to see ourselves as trying to help bring everybody together and bring everybody forward. So we're open to all ideas. So I'm not going to speak anymore, Neil. You're back in the chair. Sorry.
No, that's brilliant. It was a nice Jerry Springer moment. But I think thanks, gents, for your time, and I guess it's just tying this probably nicely up for lunchtime as well to bring the summit to an end as well, and just thank our sponsors and all the panelists once again for the time and insight on that. Thank you for your time.